Our next speaker is Nataly Bovopoulos. I hope I pronounced that correctly, Nataly. Nataly joined Mental Health First Aid Australia team in 2011, first as a program manager, since 2012 as the Deputy CEO, and also served as the company secretary from 2011 to 2015. So Nataly brings a lot to this gathering, 10 years experience in this sector, and if you please give Nataly a warm welcome.
Good morning, everyone. I'd just like to start off by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. My name is Nataly Bovopoulos. It's pretty close, pronunciation is a hard one, so I'm used to many iterations. And Nataly as well, with the Y, I mean, thanks Mum. Why? So I'm the acting CEO at Mental Health First Aid Australia. I'm very fortunate to work there, and I'm also a PhD student at the University of Melbourne. And workplace mental health is a very passionate topic of mine. It's the topic I'm doing my PhD on, and I guess it originates from working in the mental health sector where there are more staff with lived experiences of mental health problems, so it is more at the forefront within the work environment, but also at a time where I was managing a staff member and they attempted suicide during work hours. So that obviously had a very deep impact on me and has really changed the course of my work and made me really want to make an impact in this area. And thankfully that person is very well, so it's a good story. So I just want to talk to you about the role of mental health first aid in the workplace. Let's see if this is working. Is this going? No? There we go. Okay, I'm just going to talk to you about the relevance of mental health first aid for workplaces, and an overview of the program and the available training options for workplaces. And then I just want to take you through a couple areas that I've been working on in my PhD. So one are guidelines on how to provide mental health first aid to a co-worker, and then a little bit about big picture strategy on how mental health first aid can be part of your policy or framework around workplace mental health. Now, just quickly, who has done mental health first aid here in the audience? Awesome, look around. Any instructors? Excellent. So for people who haven't done mental health first aid and are interested afterwards, I mean, I'm here all day, but do speak to other people at the conference as well. All right, so just quickly, I mean, you will have heard a lot about, wow, I'm really having issues with this today. There we go. So you're here because mental health is an issue in your workplace. So you understand that it is a common problem within the work environment, and that it presents itself in terms of impaired productivity in workers that you might be managing or working with. But the good news is that mental health problems don't actually develop overnight most of the time. They're actually health issues that will develop gradually. And being at work, for a lot of us, we're at work a lot, it actually provides us an opportunity to notice those early signs and symptoms as they're developing. So being a co-worker or being a manager of an employee actually puts you in a great position to notice those early signs and symptoms. So what mental health first aid can do is actually, when it is provided early, it can prevent a problem from worsening and help a person return back to their usual performance quickly, bounce back, and it can also help to prevent a problem becoming more difficult to manage or a crisis emerging. And as Lucy mentioned earlier, there has been research that indicates there's a $2.30 return on investment that workplaces can expect to receive if they engage in mental health first aid training for their employees. So this report came out in 2014 and it was conducted by PwC and Beyond Blue, and it found that there was a number of strategies that are effective. I don't know if the batteries are getting bad on this, by the way. I'm going to be clicking a lot. There's a number of different strategies that they found to be effective that workplaces could expect this return on investment. And the important thing to note was that they really noted that it's important to have leadership around these strategies, and it's not just about doing one thing, that you'll have more effect with the more strategies that you implement. So it's really about looking at a comprehensive way and making sure that you have that commitment from the top down. And the report recommended that mental health first aid should be offered at least twice a year to at least 30% of employees, and the benefits would be found in improved productivity, so reduced presenteeism, absenteeism, and reduced workers' compensation claims. The other report that's actually around workplace mental health that is in support of mental health first aid is something that also came out in 2014, commissioned by the Mentally Healthy Workplace Alliance, and it indicated 6 key areas of creating a mentally healthy workplace. And mental health first aid fits into 2 of those areas. So the first one's around early intervention, where the activity is provide mental health training so all staff can support one another. And the second area was around increasing awareness. The activity is conduct regular mental health awareness programs and training. So from these 2 documents, I feel very comfortable in saying that mental health first aid is very much a suitable part of a workplace mental health strategy in workplaces. So let me tell you more about the actual program. So it's an Australian innovation. It's been around for almost 20 years now. Started off by Betty Kitchener and Tony Jorm, a wife and husband team based in Canberra at the time. Betty is a mental health consumer and Tony is a researcher. And it has spread really rapidly. They just thought it was something that they could do in their local community. They're Rotarians, they love to volunteer. Little did they know that it would spread to over 20 countries. We deliver over 4,000 courses nationally per year. We have over 1,300 instructors across Australia. Over 500,000 Australians have now done mental health first aid. It was a milestone we achieved late last year. And over 2 million people worldwide have done mental health first aid. So we define mental health first aid as the help provided to a person developing a mental health problem, experiencing a worsening of an existing mental health problem, or experiencing a crisis. And that first aid, just like physical first aid, is offered until appropriate treatment is received or until the crisis resolves on its own. So mental health first aid was very much modelled on conventional or physical first aid. We have an action plan called ALGE, and we don't teach people to become psychologists, just like first aid doesn't teach people to become doctors or surgeons. And it's also not a therapeutic group either. So we're very clear about what skills people gain from the training. So mental health first aid is really about early intervention. We're trying to, what Betty calls, nip it in the bud and prevent a crisis from actually emerging. So it fits in that area of when a person's first becoming unwell, and mental health first aid might be offered through to where that person is accessing early treatment. Now, we've talked a bit about data during this session, and I guess one of the things we're most proud about at Mental Health First Aid is that it has a very strong evidence base. As I mentioned, Tony is a researcher, so they evaluated from day one. They're geeks, they love it. So we can stand very strong in the evidence base and the claims that we make about its effectiveness. Everything that is in the course is based on research, so it's not the opinion of a particular staff member, certainly not mine, or any particular consultants we have. We consult with expert stakeholders, including consumers, carers and professionals, not just in Australia but overseas, and we ask them what should be provided in terms of mental health first aid for depression or for suicidal thoughts or behaviours or panic attacks, and they have to reach 80% consensus, and that's what we will include in our guidelines, and that's what gets turned into our training. And so we use data to inform our curriculum, and we also evaluate as much as possible. So over 20 evaluations have been conducted on mental health first aid, including a meta-analysis, which is a study of studies. And below is what you'll see you can expect people will gain from the training. So they have increased knowledge on how to provide mental health first aid, more positive attitudes to appropriate treatments, less stigmatising attitudes, the kinds that prevent people from seeking help, more supportive behaviours to others, more confidence in actually providing that support. And when we have measured it, we've actually found that the mental health of participants themselves improve, even though that's not something we try to achieve in mental health first aid. But it makes sense, because when we learn I don't know about you, but I think about myself first. So I think participants can often apply that learning to themselves and then maybe go and help seek. So what we actually teach in the curriculum is about mental health problems in Australia, the action plan that I've mentioned called ALGE. We go through depression, anxiety and substance use problems, the high prevalence illnesses, as well as psychosis, a low prevalence but high impact mental health problem. And we go through eating disorders in our youth program, and then we go through a variety of mental health crises, including suicidal thoughts and behaviours. Our flagship course is our 12-hour standard course, so just like first aid is 2 days of training, so is mental health first aid, but it can be broken up into 4 sessions. And this is a suitable course for communities and for workplaces. And our 4th edition's just been launched, and we have included eating disorders and gambling problems in our manual. And people who do the 12-hour course can become accredited as mental health first aiders for 3 years. So again, just like first aid, and we're tracking people so that they can come back and do refresher training and keep those skills up to date. We also have some other training options. We have a new 4-hour specialised course on how to help someone who's suicidal. And we also have tailored blended training, so more flexible training options for different groups. And to, I guess, reward workplaces, because we do have a lot of workplaces that engage mental health first aid training for their staff, we have a skilled workplaces initiative. So workplaces often use this as their benchmark for when they decide to roll out training. We have bronze, silver and gold kind of recognition, depending on how many, what proportion of staff they train. Okay, so now I just want to get to the guidelines for workplaces, because I wanted to impart a little bit of kind of knowledge or skills that you might be able to take back. So these guidelines were produced last year as part of my PhD, and they are aiming to fill a gap in our guidelines. It's really about, I guess, how you would change your approach around mental health first aid in the workplace, if it was a co-worker or if you're the person's manager. So the guidelines cover how to approach someone and provide that support to them if you're worried about them in the workplace. There's also tips for managers on those tricky areas around performance management and mental health problems, providing reasonable adjustments, and also a couple of crisis situations, so strategies on how to manage a situation when an employee is acutely distressed or if they're intoxicated in the workplace. So because I don't have much time, I'm just going to give you a little tiny snippet of a few areas within this document. The first one, I guess, and this is a question that, you know, I've had this conversation a lot with people. You know, you're worried about someone that you work with. Should I say something? Should I talk to them? So the guidelines give a little bit of structure to that decision-making process. So there's 3 questions that the guidelines say you could ask yourself. Do I have the appropriate knowledge and skills to be able to help that person? Have I done any training around mental health? Do I have positive experiences, attitudes and beliefs around mental health problems that are going to assist me with talking with that person? And am I contributing to the positive aspects of the workplace culture? So if any of the answers to those questions were no, then perhaps you aren't the right person to actually speak to that, to approach them and express your concerns and offer support, because those areas might impede you in some way, or that person might not be willing to talk to you quite so much. So the guidelines suggest that if the answer was no to any of those questions, then consider talking to someone else in the work environment who you think do fit that criteria and asking them to approach the person. Another quick snippet I wanted to take through was around reasonable adjustments and performance management. This was an area that was quite vexed in the literature when we developed the guidelines. Very tricky. Not as much came out as I had hoped, but this is what did come out and people agreed with. So if the person is having difficulties with their performance and they appear to be experiencing a mental health problem as well, the guidelines say that the managers should be prepared to undertake mental health first aid and offer reasonable adjustments and appropriate support before actually addressing those performance issues. And in case you don't know what reasonable adjustments are, there's the definition. But I guess it's important to note, when it comes to mental health problems, usually the reasonable adjustments that people require are quite minimal and might be quite short-term. It might be just some changes around work or particular tasks or needing a more quiet space to do their work. And if in doubt, talk to HR or EAP if you have available to work through what kinds of adjustments are possible for that person. So more on managing performance issues, the guidelines say, well, to have regular discussions with the person about how they're coping with their workload, and if you've provided adjustments, how is that going? How is it making things better for them? The guidelines also suggest actually changing the way that you manage that person. For some people, when they're experiencing symptoms of mental health problems, they need to be managed in a much more structured way. So maybe more close monitoring, helping them prioritise their tasks. If you do need to then go into kind of formal performance management, the guidelines say it's very important to be very clear about the purpose of those meetings, be very transparent, and offer the person the ability to bring in a support person because they might find that makes them more comfortable. And the guidelines say, look, actually don't be afraid to actually talk about your expectations about performance. Even though this person might be experiencing mental health problems and you're providing support at that level, don't be afraid to also clearly state, well, this is actually what we hope from you too. Okay, in my last few minutes, I just want to talk about implementing a mental health first aid strategy. So this is another area I'm doing research into. I've been interviewing different organisations who are kind of doing a more strategic approach and finding out how that's worked for them. And I guess overall, what we suggest for workplaces to do is offer mental health first aid training as much as possible to all of your workforce, because culture changes through everyone, not through particular individuals. You've got to change as many people as possible for behaviours to really, to also change. Encourage workers who have completed mental health first aid to become accredited mental health first aiders, and the ones that do become accredited could become mental health first aid officers. We also think it's really important to have an underpinning policy, and we have a free policy template available on our website. And appoint mental health first aid officers, so just like physical first aid officers, and promote them to all workers so people know where they are and how they can access them. And support those people if you are appointing them in those roles. So just a little bit more about what does a mental health first aid officer mean. So it's someone who holds a current certificate in mental health first aid, spends the vast majority of their time at the work site so they can be actually available to support someone if needed, and can be called away from their normal duties if necessary. Also important that they can demonstrate that they can maintain confidentiality and an ability to relate well to others, because I guess that's the difference with mental health first aid over physical first aid. It's about those interpersonal skills. In terms of employer responsibilities, I'm regretting using all this animation. So employers are responsible to, I guess, train those mental health first aid officers and support them, clearly communicate if there's psychological hazards around in the organisation. Provide a safe and private space so that people can have conversations around mental health, because that's actually going to facilitate the conversations happening more easily when they feel that their privacy is going to be protected. And ensure what workers know what to do in a crisis situation. And some people ask me, well, what's the ratio? If we're going to do mental health first aiders, how many should we have? And I guess a general rule of thumb would be, well, if you have first aid officers, appoint as many mental health first aid officers so that the workforce can see that you actually value their mental health as much as their physical health. But the caveat would be, well, okay, what is actually necessary in your workforce? How big is it? What's the diversity? And does the nature of the work actually increase the risk of mental health problems over physical health problems? Because then you might actually need to train more people in mental health first aid. And I just want to finish off with two quotes from the research that I've been doing. So the first quote is someone who benefited from receiving mental health first aid. So this person said, well, when I realised that things had really turned around, this guy from a small site in regional New South Wales, a man in his late 40s, he'd had a panic attack at work and his team was huddled around him, got the support, made sure he got to the doctor, gave him a few days off. But then what that person did, he posted his story on a shared message board. He explained what had happened to him, and he said part of his recovery was that he wanted to speak about it because if it ever happened to someone else, they would know it was normal. And I thought that was so powerful because if you looked, he was a man in his 40s from regional Australia, and generally they are not the kinds of people that open up and share their mental health experiences. So I thought that was just a really powerful story. So the other flip side is the benefit for the mental health first aid officer themselves. So this was someone who was in a HR role. And they said, well, I found it to be excellent in terms of any conversations or advice that I give out to managers, particularly around performance management or behavioural concerns, whatever it might be. My line of questioning now is, have you had a conversation with that individual and determined that there's not actually other factors outside of the work environment that are causing X, Y, and Z? So for that person's actually changed their frame of thinking when an issue has been presented to them, so that they help those managers consider whether or not it's a mental health problem actually contributing to the issue, and then seeing that they can support that person through that. So I'll just leave you with our URL because that's where you can find out about training available. Also, all our guidelines, the ones that I quickly took you through, are free to download, so you can read through that in your own time. We have a free policy template, and you can apply to be a skilled workplace. So thank you.
Okay, are there any questions of Nataly?
G'day, Nataly. Just wondering the types of people that you get to be these mental health first aiders. Are they generally the physical first aiders or the conventional first aiders, or it's a different skill? So I know you put up a few points of characteristics, but generally what you're seeing out there, is it generally those types, or do you need sort of people that are genuinely interested in this?
The way I've seen it work best in organisations is where they actually do a voluntary call for interest, and then they'll have a brief set of selection criteria. And so ask the people why are they interested, what's their background, and actually gain permission from the person's manager for them to do the training as well. And from the conversations I've been having, it seems to be the people that already do have those interpersonal skills. So they're already in situations where they're being called upon if there's a crisis at work, or they're having, they look out for people and end up, having conversations around how they're going, psychologically. So I think, yes, absolutely, the first aid officers often are very appropriate because, again, they've probably put their hand up and they're really interested in the health and safety of employees. But I think it's just that extra element around interpersonal skills, and that's why I think it being voluntary is great, because you do tend to find those people who are comfortable having those kinds of conversations and like being quite social in the work environment.
No further questions. Okay, thank you very much, Nataly.
Thank you.